Before we get started, I want to tell you about my experience with Own It Fitness. Own It Fitness is a place that helped me discover my fitness goals. They did a full evaluation of my physical condition, and they set out a plan for me to be able to meet my goals. And on top of that, they found a way to be able to work with my busy schedule. And they can do that for you as well. Own It Fitness is the perfect place for professionals to find the friends that they need to help them meet their physical goals. If you're looking for a place that can help you, if you're looking for a place that's friendly and a place that will help you confidently meet the physical goals that you have for yourself, then check out Own It Fitness. They're on the corner of Maury and Blakeow. This episode has been brought to you by Fremont Bank. Fremont Bank has been serving people and businesses in our community for over 60 years. For more information about the Fremont Bank, check out episode 104 on the Fremont Podcast. This episode has also been brought to you by Minutemen Press. If you are looking for design or printing needs, reach out to them. Let them know you heard about them on the Fremont Podcast. They'll give you 20% off on your first order. Banter Bookshop is your local go-to for all your reading resources. If they don't have it on the shelf, you can ask them and they can order it for you. Check them out on Capitol Avenue. Let them know that you heard about them on the Fremont Podcast. If you are looking to buy or sell a home, check out Petrocelli Homes on Niles Boulevard.
So it's a huge pressure. And even when you think you want to be supportive of your wife, that she's in the right, this is the way you've agreed to raise your children, this is how the world is around you, you think that's the best thing that you and her are doing, this you got to stave off that pressure from the parents. And so men either fold and, oh, my mom says you need to do this, or they say, listen to the mom and say, yeah, sure, but then blow it off. Or they build distance. It's like, yeah, you can come visit for a week and then we'll manage the theatrics and then you'll be gone and we'll do our own thing.
But the couples who are born and raised in India, but they're coming here post-marriage, or often the woman is coming here from post-marriage, one of the things which I know I went through was isolation. Not talked about. Isolation and then consequently depression until they are assimilated into the workforce or they go back to college. So, and I'm saying this because I lived that. I lived that experience. This was foreign to him.
Coming to you straight from Fremont, California, this is the Fremont Podcast, dedicated to telling the stories of the past and present of the people and places of the city of Fremont, one conversation at a time.
The staff at Ohlone College on the Fremont campus, well, at least some of the staff at Ohlone College on the Fremont campus, are fond of keeping track of the birds that live on campus. I'm here in the upper level roundabout, and I'm looking at least 2 woodpeckers. Are there usually more than 2?
There can be as many as probably 10 to 12. There's 6 palm trees here, and as you can see, they are very heavily...
Yeah, pecked with holes. Yeah, especially toward the top.
Yeah. So, and what I actually love is that there's new growth at the top of the palm trees, and that is from the woodpeckers storing acorns and other seeds. It's actually not palm tree growth.
Oh, like there are oak trees. Yeah, you're right. There are oak trees growing on the top of the palm trees.
Yeah. There are at least maybe 2 sets of ravens who have a presence on campus. There's another pair that nested on the top of the bell tower over by the Smith Center. And then this nest we just noticed this year.
And who's the we? Like how many people on campus that you know of enjoy keeping track of the birds?
Well, I I think a lot of us do. I think that's one of the beautiful things about working so close to nature is that you do have access to wildlife. And I would say majority of that wildlife are birds and insects. A fair amount of people have noticed this nest. It's in a walkway space where, a number of people probably pass through. We have a number of swallows on the campus. They always return every spring. So everybody who's worked here for any length of time knows the swallows. And last year and the year before, a whole bunch of us, including even our photography department, got really into following a blue heron nest. We've had 2 sets of nests up in a blue pine tree on campus.
The ravens are currently just sitting on a outdoor stair banister, kind of surveying the land.
I believe that's mommy or daddy. I cannot fully tell. And then one of the babies. And the baby is sitting back a little further than mommy. That mommy has been very protective the last couple of days. I take a little bit of solace seeing that she's actually perched right there, because 2 days ago, in an attempt to get a slightly better look at the nest, I opened the door from the building to that stairwell. I turned and looked to the left, and there she was coming straight at me. I freaked out, and I ran back inside and closed the door quickly. I really do believe it's that, her babies were in a pretty vulnerable state. They were just learning to fly. In fact, one of them hadn't fledged yet, and she was feeding it, actually, just a short while before I stepped out there. So I probably should have known better. Maybe she was just attempting to land where she is right now. But it certainly seemed like she was coming right at me.
In the small line of windows that are at the top of the gym is a long row of windows, and in one of those is very obviously the nest.
Right. And even just a little further down the building, under the eaves of that kind of those windows, you can see a swallow nest as well. Yeah. So there are so many birds on this campus. There really are. There's a lot of songbirds, birds who love, picking at the olives down Olive Lane. We have ravens and other raptors. We have hawks around. And occasionally a heron or an egret will stop by. So it's pretty exciting, actually, if you think about it, to have access to all that just during your workday. Oh, here comes somebody. Oh, I do think that's one of the babies. You can kind of tell they're not the most secure flyer. Now I'm curious to see if baby makes his or her way back to mom.
I can understand the addiction. I haven't even been here that long, and there's lots of action. You are listening to episode 122 of the Fremont Podcast.
Now, here's your host, Ricky B.
Shalini.
Shalini? Is that how he's Shalini?
Shalini.
Okay, Shalini.
Yes.
And Chet?
Chet.
Okay,
Yeah.
I had a great Uncle Chet. So my grandfather's brother's name was Chet. So that was...
There we go.
When I saw that, I was like, oh, I know that name. And you said that you've been in Fremont for 30 years?
30 years.
Okay.
Yes,
Wow.
I've been in Fremont for 30 years.
Wow. What was... tell me a little bit about your story of coming to Fremont. Like, what brought you here?
Well, marriage. So we were in an arranged marriage,
Okay.
and we came here. I mean, he was already here. He was raised in New York, but I came here and in San Francisco, but I came here post-marriage.
Okay.
Yes. And
Wow.
yeah.
Were you living in India then at the time?
Absolutely. I was
Okay,
born
and
and
then-
raised in India.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Very good.
Yes.
And then how long were you living in the United States?
So I've been living here almost 40 years.
Okay.
So I came as a child in 8th grade to New York City. Then my family migrated to San Francisco City proper.
Okay.
And in 83, we moved to Newark, actually.
Okay.
And then ever since then, I've been in the Newark, Fremont area. So a long time in here. Yeah.
I have friends that have done the arranged marriage thing. And I'm curious for you, like I have friends that recently have been married from an arranged marriage, and I have friends that have been married for a long time from that. So what was it like? I'm just curious, like you were in New York, been there since you were a young one, and then how did you get matched up with Shalini in
for me, I had been brought up here, had dated through high school, college, had long-term girlfriends, and at that point in time, I wasn't dating anybody, I wasn't, and I happened to travel to India just to be with family and stuff, and they always made it a point for me to go visit a lot of people that seemed to have, eligible young girls in the family. So
those are good friends to have.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And it's just kind of like a nudge, you guys should talk kind of thing. And then it progressed from that to, okay, let's go out on another date to, and when we say date, it was like a group date, or like brother and
chaperone
sister and my cousins were all along. And then finally, when we got comfortable, it was like they would let us kind of go off and walk on our own, and we got ice cream. So it was very kind of gradual, but choreographed. Let's put it that way.
As someone though that kind of like your formative years were in New York City, in the United States. I mean, it seems to me that was the idea of arranged marriage more of a foreign concept to you, or was it something that you were more familiar with?
Yeah, I was totally familiar with it, and that's people living in India or have gone through it. My parents have gone through it. My uncles and aunts have gone through it, but here is like, that's not how we do things, right?
Yeah.
And
so I mean, even the fact that you had had girlfriends, or you had it's just interesting that you had still had kind of like a drawback to that,
right?
The way that
and so it just kind of happened. I mean, because it was the time and place and where I was in life that I was amenable to that, right?
That's great.
Yeah, and then there's other people have quite a different story. They, they go back to India for 2 weeks with the intention of finding a bride, right? And then everything's set up, chalk. And then by the 13th day, you need to make a decision, and it's done, right?
Yeah. So, Shalini, how was that experience for you? Like, did you guys know each other then before you went back to India? Okay.
No, not at all. I was in a different city where I was raised, and so my parents and his parents lived in a different city in Delhi, which most people are familiar with, and so my parents asked me to come over to meet him, and so that's when I went and met him. And at that time, I had seen several men, but I was not interested. I was too focused on my education and on my profession, and so which was a different one. Which was a different one back then. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Then and I think when I met him, and I was like, okay, he's a great guy. He's really nice, and I actually went back. I said no. Not interested. Thank you very much. Went back, and then his parents called my parents. My parents said, "Come back." I was like, "Oh," and then my family was like, I was at 23, and my family was, "Well, you're getting old now. It's time to get married." I was like, "Ah." So. Back then, the concept of a single, like a woman, a professional woman, was not necessarily the most acceptable one, and still is. And I think still women in India still face that. And my work with clients, and over 30 years now that I have been in this profession, I've worked with clients and heard stories of arranged marriages, which are very similar. And we still had a chance of across the Atlantic dating for about 8 months. 8-9 months.
So we didn't get married in that time.
Immediately, no.
So we just did an engagement ceremony. But then from there on, like, all the rules were off. We could communicate where, when we wanted,
how much,
and
that's great.
How much, So we actually got to know each other really well. We're in a long distance relationship, right? For 8-9 months.
Wow.
Except that in long distance relationship, the end of 8 months, you're getting married.
That's right. And it was, and the marriage, I'm assuming, took place in India then?
Yeah,
It did.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
That's great.
Yes.
Wow. So then did you guys move to New York? Did you move to New York then, or was
No,
that
no,
about the time
Fremont.
started heading back to
So
Fremont?
I've been in
Okay.
Fremont for the last 33
91?
years.
Okay.
Yeah.
33
Okay.
years. Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
really cool. So you mentioned clients, and I think that kind of leads into part of the reason why we're here. But you said you have talked to clients over the years that have had various experiences. So tell me a little bit about what you do and what it means to have clients, and what you do for them.
Okay, that's a great question. So I'm a marriage and family therapist in Fremont, and I've been in, my goodness, in this profession for 30 years, as I was saying, ever since I started my program in psychology. And I've been working with clients literally up and down the Bay Area. I've worked with different agencies. I work with kids. I work with adults. And I work with couples and families. So in my work here in Fremont, when I started my private practice, after I did my stint with a whole bunch of different agencies, in my work here in Fremont, there's a lot of different cultures. And it gave me the privilege of working with a lot of South Asian cultures, because there's many here. And in many South Asian cultures, across the board, and I'm talking about, let's say, from Bhutan and Myanmar, that's it's called, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Thailand, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and then the UAE. So pretty much along that corridor, arranged marriage is a very normal, common concept.
Okay.
So part of the work that I do with couples that come in to my practice, I do see the difficulties and challenges of two people who barely know each other connecting. And in an arranged marriage, especially in the South Asian cultures, it's not two people getting married. It's entire families, not just the core families. It's the extended families commingling and getting married, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, and that creates a lot of difficulties and strives for the couplehood, because the pressure is ultimately on the couple. The families may be about 18,000 miles away. They may be on the other side of the continent.
Sure.
But the pressure and the expectations that they exert on the couplehood, on the relationship, is enormous. And we see a lot of the families being burdened, overwhelmed by the pressures. For example, we recently did a workshop on unpacking the in-law baggage.
Okay. Okay.
And people were surprised, and we did it for our clinicians, and clinicians from literally, we had 500 clinicians on one of the workshops from around the country and beyond. And they were saying, we never realized that the in-law aspect is so important. We hear it, but unless we are educated, we are asking the clients to tell us more about it. We have no idea that this is such an important part of their lives and impacting the relationship. So I can talk on forever, but to give you a chance.
That's great. I mean, yeah, I think that was part of, like, as you were even telling your story, which I find truly fascinating, because I think that, from a Western mindset, or at least I'll say American mindset that I have, you kind of, you can go about, like, if your goal is marriage, which I think, many people's goal is marriage. If your goal is to end up having a family, marrying somebody and all of that, a lot of times you, like, whether you realize it or not, or whether you do it consciously or not, you kind of you approach the relationship by, like, here's a checklist of things that I really want in a spouse, or you approach it from, this person, we don't get along, we get along, that sort of thing. And oftentimes you kind of are, when you enter into that marriage relationship, eventually, I can see that you you kind of are putting your eggs all in the basket. Did I choose well? Did I make a good choice in, like, this person, because they did this, they can do this, and it checks all these boxes. But then all of a sudden you start experiencing problems and challenges, and it's like, oh man, did I mess up? Did I choose the wrong person? In your case, and in, like, what you're talking about with, like, the culture that you guys come from, it's like you can't look back on it and say, did I choose well? You almost have to look back, and you have to come from a different perspective, I think. I mean, what are some of the things what are some of the approaches that you take when it comes to counseling? Well, actually, before we ask that, you can answer that later. But I'm interested for both of you. I mean, you've been married for 30, 40, how long?
30, 40 years.
So,
Yeah.
yes. So, yes and no.
Okay. Okay.
Yes and no.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is, tell me a little bit about your story and,
yes.
what are some of the things that you found that you had to work through that maybe were challenges and difficulties?
So I think for men in the South Asian culture, it's really challenging because we have an expectation that it's a patriarchal society.
Right.
Men rule the kingdom, the castle. Yeah. Right. You will get everything and everybody within your kingdom to follow your lead, and if you have a wife that is kind of stepping out of that, normative what they expect, then hey, you got to tow her in. What do you
gotta deal with
what
this.
kind of man are you, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So it's a huge pressure, and even when you think you want to be supportive of your wife, that she's in the right. This is the way you've agreed to raise your children. This is how the world is around you. You think that's the best thing that you and her are doing. This you got to stave off that pressure from the parents, and so men either fold and my mom says you need to do this, or they say listen to the mom and say yeah sure, but then blow it off, or they build distance. It's like, yeah, you can come visit for a week and then we'll manage the theatrics and then you'll be gone and we'll do our own thing.
Yeah.
It's a challenge.
Yeah. What were some of the what are some of the challenges you have? Let me tell me a little bit about your experience with that.
So some of the challenges I think we had initially is we didn't know each other. So we knew a little bit, but we were also complete strangers with two different cultures. So he's far more acculturated than I was back then. And so I had to, and I was also going in my journey trying to figure out what I wanted to do since after I came from India. So in that journey, I think the in-laws were not an issue in the beginning for us. Yeah. Because his mother is no more and his father was back then in India. So the in-laws were not an issue. It was, as an arranged marriage, as a couple, it's like you said, the American system is so different. Yeah. And we have adult children. So we see their journeys, which is very different from ours. Yeah. So like Chet, they date and they have relationships, long-term, short-term. So they have gone through this process and they still are going. So for us, it was learning to know each other was a big challenge, And learning is not just as individuals, learning about the cultures. We were now, he is multicultural. What he didn't tell you, he's also raised in Kenya.
Oh.
So he is multicultural. He's been exposed to so many different cultures. I was exposed to Indian culture and the Western culture. Love the Western cultures.
Yeah.
So I assimilated, it was not an issue. But the mindsets were still impacted by our cultures. Yeah. So how we thought and had expectations of each other, like in gender roles, for example. Yeah. How things should be, patriarchy versus wanting independence versus equality. So those were the struggles that we actually faced, and not necessarily like it was an easy process. And that's something I do see. Even if both the couples in my practice, they are born and raised in India. Chet was raised here and in Kenya. But the couples who are born and raised in India, but they're coming here post-marriage, or often the woman is coming here from post-marriage. One of the things which I know I went through was isolation. Not talked about. Isolation, and then consequently depression, until they are assimilated into the workforce, or they go back to college. So, and I'm saying this because I lived that experience. This was foreign to him. Okay. And this was really because he didn't experience that. He came here as a child. He had assimilated. He had created his identity, his support system. I'm coming here with no one.
Yeah.
Not knowing anyone.
Right.
So I'm saying that was one of the frictions, I think, between us, because he would be at work and I was calling him, when are you coming home? Oh, boy.
You're my person that I need.
Yeah. So I think, when I work with clients from different communities, different countries, that's one of the things I do intensively look at. It's, what was your migration story? Wherever you came from.
Yeah.
Sometimes, even within the country, United States is a large country. Moving and leaving back extended family, unless you're coming with a family of your creation, it's very lonely.
Yeah. We'll be right back. You can hear the rest of this conversation in just a moment.
Do you know what else shopping online for books is bad at? Finding the book next to the book that you want. Now, the online stores are going to make believe that they can do that for you through suggestions, but it is not the same. And finding the book next to the book that you came in for is one of the best feelings you can have in a bookstore. So go to Banter Bookshop, find the book you were looking for, and the book next to it.
I want to tell you about Minuteman Press in Irvington. They are your quality printer to go to here in Fremont. I have personally worked with them before, and I find their services to be fantastic. Look no further than Minuteman Press in Irvington. You can find them at 44141 Fremont Boulevard in Fremont. If you need help navigating the local real estate market, contact Petrocelli Homes on Niles Boulevard. Jennifer helps her clients make smart real estate decisions that benefit them in the long run. So if you're looking for a realtor who knows what they're doing and who genuinely cares about your needs and wants, reach out to Jennifer today and discover why Petrocelli Homes is the right choice for all of your real estate needs.
The Ohlone College Flea Market is happening every second Saturday of the month from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. on Ohlane's Fremont campus. Fremont Bank has been around for 60 years, and they sponsor a lot of stuff. And now, included on the list of things they sponsor, is this podcast. Thank you, Fremont Bank.
Do you find yourself, because you specifically deal with this general culture or people group that it's kind of I would say a niche community, but there's a lot of people here from South Asia.
Yes.
Do you find yourself like trying to reinforce the culture in some ways, or do you find that perhaps some of the work that you have to do with your clients is kind of undoing some of the culture in order to deal with certain things? In other words, when I think about like an arranged marriage, I think there's some things about that could be really just like relieve a lot of weight off of someone's shoulders. But then there's some things about that where I'm just like, man, I feel like I would almost be a prisoner in some ways, And so and that could be my individual situation. One person, is just, like you were talking about, like when you first came to the United States, you're like, you're my person. When are you coming home? I need you. You weren't feeling like a prisoner. You're feeling like I'm tied to you and I love you, So you have that part of it. So that can be a help to you. But I think for some people it could probably feel like, what did I do? You feel like a victim of other people's choices, in that sense. So how much of what you do is to kind of like just navigate like just personal conflicts, and how much of it is to reinforce culture or to perhaps, deconstruct culture and then try to put something back together?
That's an excellent question. So in my job as a therapist, my job is not to reinforce their values or beliefs. My job is to ask what are their values and beliefs that are fitting into the situation, the current situation they're in. Is naming and identifying the difference in cultures. For example, like naming that you're coming from a different culture, which is South Asian cultures tend to be very collectivist. Okay. You're coming to which is a Western cultures are very individualistic. So just naming so that people can recognize that there's a reason I'm feeling different. There's a reason for that. So part of it is process is normalizing, naming and normalizing their experiences, so they don't feel something's wrong with me. As for it comes to, do you deconstruct the culture? People, and I think I hear that as assimilation and acculturation.
Yeah.
People do that. Different people do that at their own pace.
Yeah.
And often it is dependent on their life experiences and how do they internalize and process those life experiences into learnings.
Yeah. Yeah.
And their traumas. So there's a lot of different factors. For example, somebody who came here, I was very fortunate as somebody who came here, I got into college and I chose psychology and I started studying, found an amazing cohort of friends, and 30 years later we still are friends.
Wow,
so
that's awesome.
That gave me the roots. That helped me create a family of my choice, a family of creation.
That's great. That's
so
great.
they became part of my family.
I like that family of choice, because I
Yes.
know where you're coming from because
Yes.
of the echoes of what you said, where an arranged marriage is not just the bringing together of two people, but two families. And so in some sense, you're not even in charge of the choice of who you marry, but even who your in-laws are, who your extended family is. And in some sense, by, finding a second family in your colleagues and the people that you went through college with and, went through all of that, kind of gives you the option of, here is my family that's given to me by someone else's choice, and here's the family that I get to choose, that I get to be a part of that, and and I think both can have their values to them, so that's interesting. How does I don't know, I'm interested, how does that work for a lot of people? Like I like the way that you said that you don't try to speak. I can't remember exactly the words you used, but it was like you don't try to reinforce their perception of their culture, but you try to ask them to identify for themselves what it is that
and explore with them. What works for them.
Yeah.
I mean, what part of their cultures, people do want to keep their cultural identity. And that's important.
It is.
Because it's such a deep part of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just like your culture.
Yeah, that's right.
Coming from Wisconsin is a part of you.
That's
and
exactly
always
right.
will be part of you. Same thing. It's like acknowledging that, normalizing them, exploring with them.
Yeah.
What works, what doesn't work.
Yeah.
And then also recognizing and naming the push and pull.
Yeah.
The guilt, the blame. Often people say in a couple relationship, I've had many, many, many couples tell me, I am really missing my family. I want to help them and I'm sending money and resources, and that is true. And people do. The partner is saying, I don't understand, especially in like cross-cultural relationships where people are from two different cultures coming together. And they tell me, the partners tell me, I don't understand this concept of this guilt that you have towards your family. Filial loyalty. What do you mean filial loyalty? Doesn't something like the Italians did? What are you talking about? So understanding those concepts that it's, for example, that is a collectivist culture. That culture needs the younger people to support the older people, because in those cultures, in those countries, there are no senior homes.
Yeah.
There's not care for, there's no social security.
Yeah.
Who takes care of the elderly is the children.
Yeah.
So having an understanding of what's happening for each individual in the session of their process, and helping them name it and recognize it. So then they can say, okay, I'm not just acting just because I feel like this. I'm doing certain things because I have certain loyalties. I feel guilt. I feel like I'm abandoned my family. Okay, now let me see what works for me or not.
Yeah.
So it helps the partners also to recognize what's happening with their partner. So
I'm thinking, so as you were talking, and we've been talking the last few minutes, I've been thinking about this. I think that I'd be interested in knowing, and I'm not expecting you to know the answer to this, but I'd be interested in knowing what, say, the divorce rates are of different cultures, because I feel like in Western culture, American culture, like if I'm the one doing the choosing to find my partner, then I can unchoose if I decide that that's not what I, But in some cases, I would feel like in a culture where the choosing is being done for you, in some sense, and especially, and I'd like to hear you talk a little bit more about this as well, like the honor shame culture. Like I can imagine how somebody who has a choice being made for them to be in a arranged situation, for them feeling like I can't unchoose this because it was not under my power or control to bring this together. This was somebody else's doing, so therefore I'm quote unquote stuck, or I'm whatever. So then there's like this mindset of like I can't take that way out if I feel like if I'm trapped. But that also takes certain solutions off the table. And it says, no, what do I have to work with? And I think within that, like, what are some of the things that you find are helpful for people to think through? Because I think that even as coming from a Western mindset, I chose my wife, I asked her to marry me, that sort of thing. I still feel bound by for me, the covenant of marriage. I still feel that that's an important thing. And even on days when, she's the last person that I want in the room with me, it's like I still realize, no, there's a bigger picture here. So what are some of the challenges maybe, or some of the ways that you have to help people process through this understanding of like working through the relational conflicts that come up?
Multifaceted question.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Yeah, I understand.
I can talk for hours on that.
You're spending your life trying to answer these questions, and I'm asking you to answer in 2 minutes.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I think let me start with what, in my experience, just answering like the first question about what happens in an arranged marriage if somebody finds themselves stuck.
Yeah.
Usually, say the divorce rates that you mentioned. I have no data, so I can tell you, but I can tell you based on experience, divorce rates have gone up in the South Asian community. And I think, this is not just my experience, I also run a networking group of clinicians, and I hear that from most of us. And most of us the number one call we get is my relationship is in trouble. Second one is like my child is in trouble. And so, but number one call for most clinicians in the area and South Asian clinicians from now around the country, we can say, because we've been in contact with clinicians actually across the globe who work with South Asian community in different countries as well. And they say the same thing. That number one call for counseling is my relationship is in trouble. Now, people don't always come in together. People often come in individually as well. And there are times where, say, the relationship is toxic to the point where it is dangerous. Right. When there's domestic violence, when there's infidelity, then there is addictions. Those become very, very difficult. Especially if the person is in physical danger. The children are in physical danger. That becomes one of the number one non-negotiables. The other things, that can be worked on is often, unless the distance between the couple is so great that they have given up on the marriage, on the relationship.
They've already shut down. And they don't want to re-engage. There are sometimes we get that. Most of the time we are able to get them to a place to re-engage. Asking them, for example, as you said, how do you navigate those differences is, what are they missing in the relationship? Yeah. Especially if the partner is open to coming in. Then we can have a conversation. Most of the time when partners come in, because they want to listen. They want to know. Like you said, there are times with your wife, it's like, she is the last person I want to see right now, right. But you remember, she's also the person you would go to. That's right. Yeah.
When things go down.
So baby, if you're listening, I want you to hear that part of it as well. Yes. That's exactly right.
So often, that's what is happening. In an arranged marriage, the love may not be in the beginning, but the love usually grows. A lot of time, the love does grow. So the affection, the connection does grow amongst people. Does it always last? But there's no guarantees.
Yeah.
of anything.
Yeah.
So in relationships where couples are willing to come in, or one is saying something is wrong, maybe I can make some changes, people come in, and then we work on like what is missing in their relationship, what they can do. Often our focus is on developing and supporting the person.
Yeah.
Become the person they want to be.
That's great.
Often that helps in any relationship.
Yeah, that's great.
So-
Yeah. Chet, I'm curious for you. I can't remember if it was you. I can't remember which one of you mentioned, but the idea of gender roles, the patriarchy, as being a big part of. I think it's a big part of all of our cultures, but just in different ways. I think we process it. We see things differently. Like as you think about, are you also doing like therapy as well, or?
So I'm a life coach.
Okay.
So I help people
nice.
in doing transitions from careers or changes in their lives.
So I'm curious for you on the whole gender roles / patriarchy influence and so on. Like how much of that do you feel is a challenge maybe for you personally, or that you can see that transfers to a lot of other people? Because I would imagine in some cases if I grew up in a society where I'm a man, my choices matter the most, I'm the one who when I say it happens, and then being told maybe in counseling or in some sort of a therapy session, you both got to work on this, you both have got, and I'm not saying this is the way you come across it, but I can imagine, you don't approach it from this is only a one-sided problem and then you got to get in line with the man, So for you, as you process it from a South Asian perspective, like what does that feel like? What are some of the things that what is that saying to you? Like how do you process that?
Yeah, so I bring like two lenses to that. One is as a South Asian man, right? The other is as a student of economics. That's my background. And so over time, that patriarchal setup worked well before the World War II, before the 50s, white picket fence, mom stays home, raises the kids, keeps the kitchen clean, man drives home, has everything, supper is ready. But as after that, we had a period where women were forced to go to work, to help the war effort. And then when they were, in the workforce, they couldn't just be removed. They stayed in the workforce. So now you had two income, two working folks, and things had to change. I mean, all of a sudden you have a partner running the household, and so that just has evolved, and it's true in South Asian homes, especially in metropolitan cities, and like in Mumbai and Delhi and so forth. A lot of two-income families. It's not just mom that has to put the kids to bed or read to them or help them with bathing or homework. So economics force that change. And you have to recognize that what you yearn for, or what your grandfather's or great-grandfather's era is not realistic anymore, right?
Yeah, that makes
sense. And so women gain autonomy, women gain a voice in how things are to be done, and they often bring in part of the paycheck that runs the household.
That's right. Yeah.
So you have to flex.
Yeah, you have to flex. Yeah, it is interesting because for so long, like I was recently going back and watching some old TV shows and some old movies from ones that I would have either been made.
My favorite is Leave It to Beaver.
Right. Yeah. And exactly. So you look at that and you're like, in that day and age, at that time period, all of that made sense.
Yeah. Father knows
everyone
best.
could relate to that because that's what houses and families look like, across the country.
Yeah.
You didn't have people revolting. You didn't have people, like canceling it.
Yep.
This was it, and so, but now you play some of those episodes to people today. You probably have a hard time even finding those episodes, those shows, because it doesn't that's
it doesn't
people
resonate.
Are not okay with that, and so it is interesting how things. What I was going to say, I mentioned talking about like how do you help them deconstruct the culture? I was even just thinking as I was mentioning that, I was like, I feel like our society is in the middle of deconstructing our Western culture. You know, things that were okay 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago are not okay today. You know, and I think that there could be a pendulum swing one way or the other. I think there's always a pendulum swing. You could say, well, this is not okay, so let's go all the way over here. And it's like, then you find that there's a lot of problems there with it on the other side. So I guess I guess what I'm saying is like we're in a very it's becoming fluid. More and more fluid, more and more flexible situation within our society and culture today. I think so. I guess my questions for both of you, as you guys interact with people from South Asian communities that are here now, like what are some of the things that you find? And now you've already mentioned some of them, but more specifically, like what are some of the things that you find that are consistently problematic, that can be things that that maybe that you're constantly having these conversations? Like what are some of those conversations, and what are some of the things that you find are helpful solutions for fixing those?
Okay, great question again. So I'm thinking about, apart from in-laws being one of the major issues for most families, what we hear is gender roles, as I think Chet mentioned that. Yep. And the other is parenting, work stress. Parenting is an issue. So especially understanding the two different generations, the generational gap between the immigrants who come here, who were born and raised in a different country and are coming here at a later age like me, and in our 20s, to go for education or marriage and whatever reasons. So versus the generation that they're raising. So that is a big source of conflict within families. So those are some of the things that we come in. So in-laws is usually number one, gender roles, work stress, and then parenting differences.
What are some of the things that you help parents? I mean, I'm trying to think how I would approach trying to talk to somebody about that and encourage them. Like, what are some of the things that you find to be helpful to help parents navigate that?
Is helping them understand that there are two different cultures at clash, two different generations clash, and is understanding what the kids are going through. For example, I have this class that I actually workshop that I do often in the library here and other places. It's called Communicating with Your Teens. Rather, we call it How to Get Your Teens to Listen to You. Now, in my culture, when I started doing this workshop, when I started promoting this workshop in the South Asian community, I made the mistake once, or actually started with how to have effective conversations with your teens. I don't think I got too many people. Maybe about 20 people showed up. As soon as I changed it to how to get your teens to listen to you, I had 80 people standing room only.
Wow.
So I was like, and this was this tiny room in the library, and that workshop still packs. Though I think the core of the workshop is how to communicate. In other words, with your teens, if you want to, is how to listen to them. Because I work with kids and teens, and that's one of the things they talk about. Our parents don't listen to us. Yeah. Because they have their expectations.
That's right.
Being the first generation immigrants here, our objective is study, earn, start a family, buy a house, put the kids in a private school or in a nice school, definitely in a nice college, whole bunch of different activities so they can get into all the wonderful colleges in the U.S. and make something of themselves better than us. Yeah. The kids are saying, thank you very much. We don't have that mindset because guess what? You're already providing for us, so we are not as hungry. So we want to do art, we want to do music, we want to travel the world, we want to have a job, quit, and do something else. And the parents are like, oh my God, what's wrong with my child? Nothing is wrong with your child. You have given them a great cushion, an upbringing. It's not that they won't find their ways. They will find a different path from yours. So that is one of the big issues that come up with my families when it comes to parenting. Is understanding your child because of the generation, the culture, the space they are in, They're not in India where you're fighting for scraps. You're not seeing people eat from the garbage, which is what we grew up with seeing.
Yeah.
So you understand the value of food. You're gonna clean your plate. But when there's food is abundant,
Right.
you're not going to clean your plate because you haven't experienced that.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we work on is working with the parents, understand and trying to see things from their lenses,
Yeah.
understanding the different cultures
Yeah.
and value systems that are at clash.
Yeah.
To be good parents. I'm not saying being the best parent or perfect parent because there's no such things.
Yeah.
But being good parents is learning to listen.
That's really good.
Yes.
That's really good. I think that when you almost going back to like the Leave It to Beaver, this is a snapshot of what the majority culture was like in the U.S. Back in the whenever that was 60s, 70s, I can't remember, but you go back to that. I think that in some ways, because we're in a time frame when there's like culture's changing and shifting and being influenced by we didn't have the access to seeing things across the world, like we do now. Like we didn't know those things existed. And now we have the ability to see everything that's going on, and it influences everything that we think and believe and we do. Whereas, you might 50 years ago in India, it might have been very clear what your future was going to be. What you were going to do. There was no question. Like the amount of flexibility with your future might have been a sum total of 15%. 15% of your life is not quite determined, but the other 85%.
That all changed after CNN and MTV.
Right.
Started blasting from satellites.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Even to that, I remember going to Albania. I went to Albania about 25 years ago, 25 years ago. And they had just, communism had just fallen. It was very closed, very, very different. But they were listening and watching, they were watching television and movies from America that were made, 20, 30 years earlier. And everybody was dressing like them. So you would go there and they would expect you're an American coming, and I'm coming in my, whatever, my Carhartts and my, whatever it is. And they're dressed like somebody out of the 70s. And I'm like, what in the world? And it's like, because that's the, so in some, you start seeing that in different places. As soon as CNN, MTV, all those places, it starts opening up a whole world.
Right. The gap between when the information would transfer, it took like 10, 15 years for those movies to make it over, was like 15 days, right?
Yeah.
Michael Jackson was a hit, right?
That's right. Yeah, I think that's really fascinating. And I do think that it is something. I think that the recovery time of the things, I say it that way, I'm making that terminology up on the spot here, but that recovery time of that, over adjustment or that adjustment to one thing or another. Because, even for me, like I didn't come from a different country, but I was born in Wisconsin, grew up in a farming community. I spent a lot of my time influenced by a farming life. My family was not well off. We lived in very poor conditions most of my life growing up. And I was the oldest of 6 kids, and I had a lot of responsibilities that, were on my shoulders that a lot of people don't have. And I'll say this more specifically because this is where I'm getting at by saying that I had a lot of responsibilities and a certain kind of situation that my son does not have. We now live in California. We now live in a much nicer house than I've ever lived. This is the nicest house I probably ever lived in my life, and we have a lot of things at our fingertips that I never would have even imagined having, to the point you were saying when I grew up, we cleaned our plate because you didn't know if we were going to have food for the next meal. And now my son's like, I'm not hungry. And I'm like, if you only knew what my mom would have said to you, if you only knew what my dad would have said to you, if you would have said that, But then it's like, do I look at, and then I have to look at that and say, is what my mom said to me or my dad said to me, was it the right thing? I think maybe in the moment it was the right thing. Maybe it was right, but should I be putting that expectation on my son, who's basically saying, I don't want to be overfed. I don't want to be over... and so then it's just like, what for me as a parent, I'm trying to like figure that out and say, how do I work around, how do I deal with this? Like, what is the right answer? So maybe I need to come to your workshops and figure out, he's not a teenager yet, but I could, use some help figuring out how to talk to him and how to listen to him.
Absolutely. So, and you're talking about culture and generational clash, cultural clash. The culture was so different when you grew up.
Right.
I mean, the space that we grew up on a farm where food was scarce and it was difficult. There were hardships. He's not going to know that.
Yeah.
Because you gave him a really good, smooth, comfortable life. And if you expect him to relate and react the same way as you did, he's not going to.
Yeah.
Because it's so different for him. Same note. This is what I tell the parents. I think that's an excellent example, and thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
being so candid about this, because this is what parents don't understand often. Why is my child so different? What your child is going through is very normal, given their circumstances, given the environment they're in. Even MTV and YouTube and Reels, and don't forget Snapchat and TikTok, and what's the other one? Insta.
All
How can you forget
all the
Insta?
stuff,
My kids are starting to lead an Insta life. It's not on Insta, it's not real.
So
that's right.
It's a very different world. And just generations here, like you said, things at your fingertip.
Yeah.
You didn't have that.
Yeah, that's right.
Access to internet.
That's right. Yeah.
It's like you can have computers, which are phones, which are smarter than computers.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Different
so
generations.
one thing I wanted to mention is that I'm in a unique position. So I consider myself not second generation and not first generation.
Okay.
I'm generation 1.5. Because I came here early enough, right, that most of my formation has been in the U.S.
Okay.
But I have very vivid memories of the young me living in India in that lifestyle with those requirements or expectations of me. So when I hear the first-gen parents preaching to their kids, I get it. I lived it, right?
Yeah.
But I also grew up here. I went to junior high, high school, college, grad school. So I know that life as well. And it's like, what are your parents saying? That's effed up, dude. I get it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I think...
But I can also tell them, hey, look, this is where they're coming from. This is what they lived through. This is the only path forward they knew.
Yeah.
And what they're doing is out of, the love for you, their way to treat you in the best way possible that they know.
Yeah, I'm interested because before we started recording, you started talking about cross cultures and being able to analyze that and interpret those things. I am curious because I do know a bit about cross cultures, and so, or at least I've talked with people who know things, and I've studied a little bit of myself. But so the Western culture, American mindset's more of a guilt innocence culture. Am I right or wrong? You're wrong, I'm right, that sort of thing. And so we approach things from, if you're late, if you said you were going to be here at 3:00 and you showed up at 3:05, you're late. Well, that's not necessarily the way that a culture that comes from more of a shame honor system would approach it. There's not necessarily a right or wrong. It's not necessarily, there's not a hard line on that. But I guess my question is this, and I'm sure there's a lot could be said about the pros and cons of a guilt innocence culture versus a honor shame culture. But I'm just wondering, with that 1.5, or with the first generation, that grew up in India or from any country for that matter, and then the second generation growing up in the United States. You have the influences of those sorts of things, the right, wrong versus honor, shame, or even the second generation. I don't know. I'm curious how that impact and the influences that in the way that people see whether it's right, wrong versus honor, shame.
I think maybe in the older generation, the reputation of the family, mattered a lot and influenced how they behaved, what they expected of their parents, what they hid about their parents, and what they promoted about their children, right? And the younger generation is like, what do I care what my aunt or, that's some neighbor or somebody in the temple or church thinks about me. I got to live my own life. My homies are good with what I'm doing. I'm getting all the likes I want on Insta and Facebook.
Everyone loves me.
He loves me. So I'm killing it. Right? So that's the dichotomy, right?
Yeah.
Well, so that comes from, I think, what I mentioned earlier about the individualistic versus the collectivist cultures. In a collectivist culture, shame and honor are important because, like Chet said, it's not about the individual; it's about the entire family. It's
that's interesting. Yeah.
Yes. Versus the right or wrong, being here on time, it's very individualistic.
Yeah.
Your basic needs are met. Individually, you are able to meet your basic needs individually in Western societies because the resources are plenty. That is not true in many South Asian countries and other countries as well.
Yeah.
And so where there is there is a need for the collective to ensure the survival of the most. So the shame and honor comes in because shame is a great motivator. Guilt and shame, I've had many people tell me, oh, my parents ruled me by guilt and shame. And I was like, dude, I totally get that. So guess what? Been there, done that.
Yeah.
And our sons are great. My older son is amazing with his boundaries. And he's like, Mom, you're guilting me. Oh, yes, sorry. But note to myself, not do that again.
That's funny.
But the cultural learnings are so deep. It's that even as a therapist, he's had to correct me and point it out, and I was like, whoa, I got to be more mindful of what I'm doing. So that is, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, kind of in response to that though, I mean, I can imagine that there are pros and cons to both mindsets.
Absolutely.
So it could be that, I would say that even just recently I was talking to a group of people that I'm helping to lead, and there's a mixture of people who are clearly, Caucasian Americans. And then there's a bunch that are from all over the world, including a lot of countries that would be considered more of an honor shame society. And I was talking to them about and I brought this up about, what it means to be late or on time or whatever, because I'm not on time the way that I ought to be sometimes. But I've been around a society most of my life where it's like when you're late, you're the one that's in the wrong. You're the one that needs to fix it, But then we were talking about, there are some people who they were talking about what does it mean to start on time? And for a certain culture, like the guilt innocence culture, it was like the way that you show honor and respect, the way that you show people that you care is that you start on time, right? But then there's other people like you don't start until certain people, the most honored people, are there. And you can't start until everyone shows up, and especially the people that matter the most. Grandpa or grandmother, or mom and dad, or whatever. And I was telling them, I think that I said to this group that I'm helping to lead, I said, neither one of them are right. Neither one of them are correct. I mean, I'm using the right, wrong, paradigm there. But I said, what we need to do is we need to show consideration toward one another and even love toward each other, and say, I want to be considerate of the people that are more honor shame focused, and said we need to recognize that we don't want to start till you get here because we do care about you. But at the same time, there's people who've been here for 20 minutes before the time because they were expecting us to start on time. And if we start 20 minutes late because there's a bunch of people not showing up on time, then we need to respect them as well. And we need to say, okay, I need to work hard to try to be here closer to the start time that was predetermined so that I'm not. So anyway, I don't know. I think it's just like an ongoing working conversation that needs to happen. And I can see how that affects the group that I'm leading, and we're not necessarily related, but I can see how that can be a challenging dynamic to deal with within a family, parents to kids, or whatever.
Oh, I think you're a very good example, especially around timing. I think that you're bringing up in a lot of collectivist culture. You're absolutely right. Everybody waits for the people who are important, the elders. Usually, it's usually the elders. Also, I was going to say there's also a logistical challenge Transportation.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
How are you going to get there on time?
Yeah.
Transportation is an issue.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So the times become stretchable. And also the boundaries, you know, that you're talking about boundaries. Okay, you come at 10 and then you got to be done by 12.
Right.
Yeah, those don't exist in those cultures.
But here we're kind of trained, you know, our school system is, it's a 9 o'clock class. You have like 9:05 and you're tardy, right?
Yeah.
And you do that too many times, that means hey, you got to run faster or
That's right.
you know,
That's right.
get your act together.
Yeah. Yeah.
'Cause you're clearly not showing respect to your teacher.
Yeah. You know, speaking of shame and guilt, I'm guilty of being late for my wife here in a few minutes.
Okay.
This is not rushing us off, but we've been having. It's funny. Like I'm looking at the time marker on our interview, and it's like we just hit an hour, and I was like, "How did that happen?" You guys, this has been an awesome conversation. I've enjoyed it very much.
Find a right, clean way to kind of wrap it down.
Well, I was gonna say, I think we could probably go on for another hour if we really wanted to, and I think that'd be super fun. But if people wanted to know more about what you're doing, and if they were interested in like hearing more of you, because I find what you're saying to be extremely fascinating, and just the fact that this is something that you regularly practice as you help people walk through this yourself. Like, what are some ways that people can find out more about you and find out what you're doing, maybe hear more of what you're doing, the workshops? How can we find out all about all that?
So absolutely. Best way to contact me is through my website, which is shalinidayalmft.com. I have my phone number, and it's 510-612-6471. That's the direct one. I also have a nonprofit, Basant, and which Chet and we run together. Great. And we co-founded and we run. So we provide that, and the workshops are through there, and they're to the communities.
How would you define the nonprofit? The nonprofit again? Yeah.
So it's called basantnow.org. So BASANT now, NOW.org. And a lot of the workshops we've done have been at the Fremont Main Library. Okay. And they're free and open to anyone and everyone. Great.
And they're focused on the things that we've been talking about?
Yeah, we did a whole series on parenting. Okay. We've done others on relationships. And so
let's continue stress, that work. Anxiety, depression, mental health, because the objective is to demystify and also take away the shame around mental health. So yes, people can find us. I think if you Google my name, my phone number will show up.
Awesome.
And best way to contact me. And I think then if there's a question for Chet, I can always let him know.
That's great.
So, but he has his own site as well.
Okay. So, and you said you did coaching, right?
Yeah.
Life coaching?
Yes. Yeah. So I'm ChetDayalCoaching.com is my website.
Nice.
So, I'm not a licensed psychologist, but more of a life coach for people who are transitioning from a career to another career or another stage in life, or just trying to improve their well-being. Yeah.
That's great. That's awesome. Well, I've really enjoyed getting to talk to you guys. It's good to meet you guys, and I'm glad. I'm thankful for what you're doing in our Fremont community. I think these are the kinds of things that we, number one, the community needs to know about, and number two, I think that we benefit from it and we don't even realize it sometimes. So I'm really grateful for what you're doing, and glad that you got to be on the podcast here.
Oh, thank you for having us. Yes, thank you.
And we'll make sure that we put all the information that you gave us in the show notes so people will be able to find that.
Absolutely.
And they won't have to go try to find it themselves. So thank you guys.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Oh, one more thing I should say. You said you had a podcast too, right?
Yes.
So the podcast, is that connected with your nonprofit, or what is the podcast?
Yeah, it is. So there's a whole library of podcasts we've done in the past on different topics related to mental health, and they're all accessible from the basantnow.org
and my site as well. I think on my site as well. And we have a YouTube channel that So we, most of the topics, and actually all the topics, are about mental health. Some different aspects, because I interview a whole bunch of clinicians, different kinds. You know, so anybody who is interested, who is a clinician and wants to come and talk on my podcast, I'll interview them. That's just great. Like you do.
We'll put a link on the podcast for the podcast here as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
This episode was hosted and produced by Ricky B. I'm Gary Williams. Andrew Cavett is the editor. Scheduling and pre-interviews by Sarah S. Be sure to subscribe wherever it is that you listen so you don't miss an episode. You can find everything we make, the podcast, and all of our social media links at thefremontpodcast.com. Join us next week on The Fremont Podcast.
This is a Muggins Media podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Fremont Podcast. If you are an individual or a business that would like to be a sponsor partner on the podcast, please reach out at thefremontpodcast@gmail.com, or you can go to our website, thefremontpodcast.com, and you can reach out to us through our contact form. Thank you for listening, thank you for sharing, and thank you for your support.